Hello, my name is Protik Mukhopadhyay. I'm an entrepreneur and an author. I'll be hosting the Reimagine Sales Systems podcast, where I'll be bringing some of the industry thought leaders who will be sharing their go-to-market strategies for their business systems.
Welcome, everyone. Today in a podcast, I have the pleasure of welcoming Robert Wagstaff from JFrog. He's the VP of Operations there. Welcome, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you, Pratik. Glad to be here.
Thank you, Robert. So, Robert, love to get a little understanding about your personal journey in the enterprise world, and how did you come to lead the revenue operations group at JFrog?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction and the chance to be here. I appreciate it. I would say mine's probably, I don't know if it's interesting or not, but I would say not the usual journey. I actually started out formal education in accounting information systems, got my master's, had aspirations of, becoming a CPA, and, going the big six route, of which I did. So I actually started my career out at Price and Deloitte, with that aspiration of doing audit and actually the IT audit side of that journey. And I don't know, unfortunately, during that journey, I figured out that wasn't my calling and in life. But at the same time, when I was at Price in the Bay Area, I worked for, this was the time where everybody's doing the big PeopleSoft, Oracle, SAP implementations. And then there was a niche that we found in terms of the change management side, which interacted both on the audit side, but also on the system side. And my manager at that point decided to start a small systems integration team within within Pricewaterhouse around a product called Tivoli. And it eventually was bought by IBM, but it was around, thousands of PCs. How do you do updates to that, especially as you look at these big, large ERP installations? And so we actually started that on the side. So continued to do audit, and most of my clients were in the tech space. And then we started to try to build this, systems integration team. And the three of us then eventually moved to Deloitte, who had actually started the same function. And so the three of us went to Deloitte and helped them start, kind of build up their function there. And then my same boss, went to Yahoo. So I did I would say the Silicon Valley, follow your leader to three different companies, which I don't know if I would promote or not, but it definitely worked out for me, because he was, he's since retired, so I can't actually work for him anymore. But but I found somebody that was that I could look up to, and he continues to be a mentor of mine. But he actually helped me kind of see and think about kind of what I did want to do. So knowing that I didn't want to go up through the ranks there. And then at Yahoo, and again, this was the time of SOX, Sarbanes-Oxley just rolled out. So my first year at Yahoo was getting Yahoo ready for SOX. So I did the IT portion of that. Again, security, change management, backup recovery, all of those things had to be in place to sign off on SOX. We were fortunate, we went through the first year, we signed off. And because of that, and because of Yahoo and the digital media space, so much of your revenue is tied into the operations. Ultimately, you're billing customers on your numbers and your metrics, that the revenue engine is tied within the operations. And so spent a year doing SOX, and then they said, hey, since you hopefully did a good job on SOX, you got us passed, why don't you come run the billing side? And for me, that was, quote, the transition where I made from kind of finance audit over into operations. And again, I didn't know what operations was at that point. I just knew, we had these billing systems and engines, and, that was the basis for our numbers. And, so I started that team where we did the billing forecast, training, plus all of our internal metrics, and which then, became our external metrics. And for me, that was kind of my career start on what was operations. And again, in the digital space. And it also, looking back now, is also, SaaS, one of the first SaaS models, because again, customers would come into Yahoo, buy quote ads or buy off our auction, but we didn't make money until people used the service or paid for the service, until we delivered something.
Yeah, so revenue recognition, performance obligation. Exactly. Yeah.
So I don't know if I lucked into both at the same time, but that's kind of how it worked out. And it's actually served me well in each of my subsequent, companies all the way up to JFrog, having both kind of the consulting background, the accounting, kind of the number side of it, but also then understanding how those interact with, the revenue and now with, SaaS companies, ARR or MRR is probably your key metric. So just to kind of move on a little bit, Yahoo, spent 5 years there. My last role was actually in London because I had aspirations of running the sales side of it. So I spent my last year and a half in London running their account management, client services, ad operations, tech operations for Europe. And again, it's cemented in my mind kind of this, at least where I wanted to be didn't want to be frontline sales, even though part of my team was, quota bearing reps and account management. But loved the sales, loved being close to the customer and also close to the revenue. So,
right.
And that really, at least for me, gave me that sweet spot between, the sales teams and the product sales teams and finance sales teams, legal, and hopefully, playing that conduit between each of those teams to hopefully, generate or maximize our value proposition.
Yeah. Right. No, that's really helpful. Very interesting. Thank you, Robert.
Yeah, I would say, and then, subsequent, spent time at Microsoft, similar role, just happened to be on the search side of the business with Bing and actually their Yahoo partnership with Bing, which then also led me to a similar role at TripAdvisor. TripAdvisor actually runs a search auction. That's their largest revenue stream. So most people don't know that, but they also have an ad network and a SaaS business. So TripAdvisor was, at least for me, an ability to kind of look across different revenue streams. They had an inside sales team. They had a field motion. They had probably one of the most complex tech stacks because of that. Because again, they ran a second, when I joined the first price auction, which they switched to a second price auction, they ran a SaaS business separately, plus the Google, we used the Google ad server and had all the Google tools to do all the ad networks. And we had a DMP there. So probably the most variety of tools across each of those business lines, and then try to integrate them into Salesforce ultimately to do all of our order customer management. Was an interesting challenge, I would say, to least, but at least gave me that breadth that I had been looking for there. And then, joined JFrog about a year ago, pre-IPO. JFrog grew up through the open source community. They started their business many years ago with an open source product that did extremely well. Went back and built a commercial version of that called Artifactory today, and did extremely well with Artifactory, and have now since built on top of Artifactory a whole enterprise suite of helping DevOps or developers, which now they call DevOps and DevSecOps folks, build, deliver, and update software continuously. They call it the liquid software vision. Interesting though, almost 100% inbound sales funnel.
That's a very interesting. So the go-to-market strategy, unlike other companies where you have direct and channel, JFrog still is probably doesn't need it or not pursuing that as a priority. Yeah.
Well, definitely pursuing it as a priority, but they grew up out of the truly land and expand model. And again, completely different than TripAdvisor. TripAdvisor was, pretty much 100% outbound,
Right.
Or field motions, with large clients. And JFrog, flipped it over completely inbound, and upsell, truly land and expand. And that's been my journey now, is building out those other components. We definitely want a channel strategy. We definitely want a field motion as the product suite has now, grown, and as our customers have matured in the DevOps and the DevSecOps spaces, they demand, a higher integration, a higher touch point, and a higher level of service to continue to grow, within their craft, in their respective companies. And, I would say COVID was very good for JFrog. When I joined, even just a year ago, I think we were, 450 folks. We're now over 700. We went public last September. Just happened to be the same week that Snowflake went public, so nobody remembers JFrog. And so, but still has been a very fun ride. And I would say that the thing that really attracted me to JFrog was the ability to build RevOps from the ground up. Unlike, Yahoo or Microsoft or even TripAdvisor, they already had sales ops and, a lot of the components. And at JFrog, it's been a build journey for me, which is extremely fun. And I would say it's probably been the most fun part of my career to date. So.
Yeah, it's always good to sort of build something when the process and systems are not there. So that's awesome. So if you dive in a little bit about JFrog, Robert, what are some of the systems that you have deployed, either internal or out of the box, to enable monetization, right? So you talked about billing, you talked about performance obligation, revenue recognition. So it'll be good to kind of get some perspective on that. And obviously, part two is how do you make that work in terms of adoption and usage?
Yeah, I would say it's interesting. While RevOps, quote, didn't exist as a team, the functions, existed at JFrog, and they were pretty smart, I would say, early on in their journey to look at, quote, best, what we would call best of breed type tools. So they are Salesforce, and they had implemented Salesforce, a while ago. And on top of that, they've implemented CPQ already. And in fact, I would say, if anything, we're kind of going the other way, where we seem to have a tool for everything. And so we have a very, I would say a very, very complete tech stack, but at the same time, not well integrated across all of the, I would say, non-Salesforce CPQ tools. And, so for example, we essentially run 3 sales teams, US, EMEA, APAC, and then we have a self-hosted version we call Cloud. And each of those, uses Salesforce differently, slightly differently. Each of them have, different needs. And so they've, implemented different tools differently. And I would say part of my journey in building out the RevOps function as a central is now to kind of realign the process across the teams. So provide more of that holistic view, provide more of a holistic process, end-to-end process parts. And I would say that's probably been my most recent journey. My first 6 months was really just building out what we needed to quote, make it as a public company. So forecast, pipeline management, metrics, stuff like that. And now that we're public, I'm going back and we're building out, I would say, the other functions of RevOps, a deal desk, a systems and tools type team. We're completing kind of our BI stack for sales. And so right now I would say I'm in the first part of my journey there was just to kind of get ready. Now I'm back in the build mode again, to kind of complete the picture, I would say, of what RevOps would normally be at any other company.
Interesting. And in terms of making, so in your case, because it is a lot of 100% or close to inbound, does JFrog have a sales and a marketing team, and do you have a proper flow of tracking your lead to orders to cash? Like, how is the process internally in terms of, I would say, tracking orders and eventually putting them in your revenue recognition system, and then doing the downstream management of those?
Yeah, good question. We hired our CMO probably 4 months ago. Yeah, back in November. So even longer ago. And that restarted the journey about tracking, the leads and the lead flows and lead definitions. So I would say in the last 6 months, so when I joined, essentially I started, quote, my sales journey from an opportunity to close. And yes, there was a lead gen function at that point, and very robust one, being that we're 100% inbound. But that wasn't, quote, what we needed to do at that point, because we actually needed to have a quarterly forecast. And because of the nature of our cycle times, to get to a quarterly forecast, you have to model out what happens in the quarter. In other words, if you can't, we're not a traditional, coming in the quarter, your X amount of your pipe, you move through the quarter. We just don't have that metric. So if you look at our, pipeline at the start of the quarter, and most traditional companies say you never make it. And it's because we build and close so much of what happens in the quarter. So my first 6 months, even to get to a robust quarterly forecast, was to model out what happens, as you're moving into the quarter, how much pipe rolls over from the previous quarter, how much do you build and close in the quarter, and therefore, what is next quarter going to look like based on those metrics.
Right.
And now, since we have a CMO, we've actually gone back and redefined kind of that whole workflow. And we use Marketo for our marketing tool. And Marketo did not agree with Salesforce in terms of the metrics. Right. And our definitions weren't consistent between the two. So we, again, had that traditional, hey, we're generating a bunch of leads. We think they're qualified leads. Sales, why can't you, convert these into opportunities faster? Right. And vice versa. Sales saying, hey, marketing, I'm not getting enough qualified leads. Why aren't you guys, giving me better leads? And so we've actually done a lot of work across teams. And to me, this is where RevOps really shines. It's that, white space between teams that typically is the, what's holding you back. And, and so we sat down and kind of said, hey, what's an MEL? What's an MQL? What attributes do we want to define in each of those stages? We have an SDR model that converts our MQLs to SQLs. So again, nobody kind of, I would say, really sat down and done the work to really kind of define that workflow, define the metrics, and then figure out kind of, why we weren't in sync, in terms of that. And I would say, thankfully we've done that now. So we have a very robust, lead funnel that we track. We have key metrics that we look at. We have a whole new business, funnel that we've now built out. And I would say, now we're at the point, I think we have all the metrics, and now we're trying to figure out what we're going to fix and obviously try to fix it as fast as possible. So.
Right. In terms of, and that's interesting. So if you look at a journey for a company, right? And I think JFrog has evolved, and so the role has also evolved. Are you using a lot of in-house tools, or are you using a lot of popular tools like Salesforce, CPQ, CRM, and Clarity? If you were to recommend a practitioner sort of who's taking on a role like this, what would your recommendation be? Like, what's your tech stack look like today?
Yeah, like I say, I would say we're probably trying to go the other way. So for,
Mm-hmm.
we have Marketo,
Right.
and then our SDRs use SalesLoft,
Right.
for their workflow. We tried to implement a tool similar to Gainsight called Tatango
Oh yeah, customer success. Right.
for customer success.
Yes.
We're now rolling out a VISO for forecasting.
Oh, okay.
Uh,
Okay. Interesting.
and then we have Yesware. We literally have probably, a tool for everything. But again, the integration and the usage varies by team.
Right.
So that is, quote, the work that we're going right now is like, we for as much as possible, I would say traditionally buy versus build, at least for the sales tech stack. And then, but we obviously have built some tools in-house, but Click is our BI tool instead of Tableau. And I'm trying to think, we just did the inventory. We actually have a lot of tools.
And Robert, today you're also like as part of RevOps, also doing the ASC 606 performance obligation, a lot of those compliance stuff to report. Now that you're a public company, is that something your team does, or is it more on the finance? Team?
At TripAdvisor, we did it all. We did bookings, billings, backlog, everything. Here, thankfully, our focus is on ARR. So our finance teams do the rev rec and revenue translation.
Got it.
For us.
Interesting. COVID was a very interesting year, and you mentioned about the IPO and also the growth. So what are your priorities for this year, right? Like, as you look at your go-to-market strategy, your sales motions, how is JFrog evolving, and what is it doing this year in terms of projects, initiatives, or even enhancements?
Yeah, I would say it's what we mentioned. It's going back and looking at our channel strategy and building that out. It's looking at our field strategy, and building that out. And for me, that both of those mean, and then it's also enhancing kind of our current, roadmap. And what's that translated to me is, as I mentioned before the podcast, is hiring. So I'm actively hiring somebody to help me rationalize our tech stack, and not just our stack for the sake of tools, but our stack in the sake of what are the sales capabilities we need? What tools then do we want to have into that stack to solve those capabilities? But let's start with the capabilities first, and build out what processes we need to have to grow each of those areas. So we still want to build it and maintain our inside sales motion, and grow that. At the same time, customers are demanding us to be more, coming through, buy, sell how they want to buy. And for large customers, that's sometimes through the channel. For large customers, it's sometimes through a field motion where you're dealing with legal and finance and procurement and a bunch of other folks that maybe typically weren't as involved, but as the deals get bigger, they become more and more involved in that process. So, which is necessitated, which is also translating us into building out a deal desk function as well. But I would say first and foremost is what we just talked about, was rationalizing kind of our process across the teams, where we want our folks to be creative with the customers, but not necessarily creative with our tools and our process. And but I mean, for us, that means taking a step back, rationalizing our process and capabilities, looking at our current tech stack to see what problems it solves, but also what gaps we still have, and to then fill, and then deciding whether our current tool set or if we want to switch out tools to solve that.
Awesome. We're almost at the end of our podcast, Robert. So I want to ask a little bit about your personal style and the kind of culture you'd evolve, right? So if you were to recommend somebody early in career, maybe working at a Big Four today or trying to be a business analyst, like what would you recommend, right? Eventually, if they have to become a leader like you, what are some of the things you would recommend them so that they can sort of build a career over time?
Sure. And I've, like I say, the things that I at least try to hire or aspire to is, I came up through the tech area, so very matrixed environments, very flat in many cases. So don't be afraid of sharing your voice and sharing your thoughts. I mean, I've, been hiring a bunch of analysts. The ones that do well obviously have the technical skills to do the job, but also come with a voice about what they're seeing and the ability to kind of share that voice versus just kind of giving me a bunch of numbers. And I think, often folks are, I don't know, hopefully not intimidated, but, hopefully I'm creating an environment where they feel like they can share, because that's, when you're in the data, you actually see things that nobody else is going to see. And I find the analysts that can kind of point to some of those nuggets as they kind of build it as the ones that drive the most value at least in our business. And so I would say, don't be afraid of sharing your voice. The other side is, hone one or two skills that you're super good at. And if you're, I would say play to your strengths. That's the typical. Don't. And if you have one or two good strengths, play those up. And if you want to build or dabble into other areas, that's great. But make sure that your strengths are key and you know them well. And then that frees you up to dabble into other things that maybe aren't your strengths, but you're super interested in. A good example is I hired an analyst, just happened to be out of Deloitte. I don't know, I wasn't searching. And he's been great at the numbers, great at putting it, but he wanted to, he never rolled out a tool before. So now he's leading our Aviso rollout. He actually put the process together. He's acted like a PM, but he's not a PM.
Right.
We hired him as an analyst, but because he did so much, did so well as an analyst, he knew the process that helped him kind of translate into something he wanted to do and wanted to experience. Now, whether he wants to stay on that track, probably not.
Right.
But it was something he wanted to try out, and he got that opportunity because he played well where he was strong.
Right.
Which.
Right. That's really insightful, right? I mean, play to your strength, develop credibility and trust, and you get opportunities, and obviously try and voice your opinion. Thank you. This has been really insightful, Robert. Appreciate all the insights about your journey and also the culture you're building. And I wish you all the best, and thanks for your time today in sharing JFrog success. Thank you.
So with that, I would like to wrap up this podcast. Thank you all for tuning into Reimagine Enterprise Sales Systems. To listen to more exciting podcasts, please visit my website, protikm.com or protikm.com, where you can subscribe to the show in iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, and other channels that you follow so that you'll never miss a show.